Hey, and welcome to this month's guest interview. It's actually a surprise guest interview. We're having two. We're having another one. We're having Peter Crow come and join us. But today, I'll talk about Peter Crow in a second. We have Jemma Pollari. And Jemma, you were introduced to me through Lori Novak because we had some questions in our community about mobile workflow and mobile editing and things like that, because we're all a little bit lost when it comes to how to use Lightroom or editing or anything on mobile and make it meaningful. And so
Mm.
welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to dive into that. I was going to say that the other guest interview, and you'll probably be interested in this, is Peter Crow wrote the DAM book of digital workflow or digital asset management. Digital asset management is DAM. And he actually wrote the book on it, and the DAM book of digital workflow for Lightroom. And so he's going to be coming back. The last time I interviewed Peter was 7 years ago. On
Oh,
we
wow.
used to do the Photoshop show, and he came as a guest. But more importantly than that is phones have come so far, haven't they?
Yeah, they really
Yeah,
have.
and
And it's hard to sort of get things working together, I found in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Um, with especially when you're using your phone and you're using your digital SLR and you kind of got these merging workflows happening. Getting the two playing nicely together seems to be convoluted and confusing.
yes, and I've heard many iPhone users complain more because of the way they handle files maybe a little differently than a Samsung or a Pixel or something else.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I only use Samsung, so I'm not sure how whether what I'm going to describe today will how that kind of works with iPhoto and things like that. But hopefully it's kind of similar across the platforms.
yeah, and we'll see. And if it doesn't translate, we're going to figure it out. Maybe not
Yeah,
today, but we'll figure it
yeah,
out. You're free to screen share. Now, I know I confess I was delayed and got late to our meeting today, and you'd already been talking with a few of the people in my community today, and they already had some questions. But I'm going to kind of let you take this over and share with us kind of what you do, and you're welcome to screen share
yep,
and kind of give us some insight into workflow. I had mentioned that this week I was out trying to do the challenge that I had in the community. This month's challenge is macro, and we have
yep,
a challenge to go and set our timer for 3 minutes and go for a walk or a ride or a rollerblade or whatever you do.
yep,
And every 3 minutes, stop wherever you are and find a macro picture or pictures
yep,
to take. And then when you get that, move on. And so I ended up with quite a few pictures on a particular walk I took.
yeah,
And I thought, well, now how am I going to share this? What am I going to do? Because I didn't want to do
yeah,
it from my phone. I kind of I like the desktop workflow. I
yeah,
tried to install Lightroom mobile, and when I went to synchronize, some bizarre thing happened, which I mentioned I was going to share with you.
yep.
I don't know why it is, and I have to ask my daughter. Um, it installed and then synchronized with around 900 of her images on my phone. And
Oh,
I
okay.
never got
That's a
to the
tricky
bottom
one.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Is
haven't got
she
to the
using
bottom
your
of it.
creative? Yeah,
I think she was on my iPad, logged
yeah,
into my account, and
yeah.
synchronized her images accidentally while it was logged into my account.
That's
And
probably
then,
my guess. Yeah.
yeah. And so I was a little bit of a wow, why all of a sudden on my phone are there 900 more images
Mm.
that don't belong there? And then it said, oh, warning, I was running out of space because it was probably loading a preview size of all of those images. And then it did synchronize with the images that were on my phone, and I ended up doubling that library. And in the
Yeah.
end, I said, no, I'm just going to uninstall this till I get to the root of the problem. So I haven't
Yeah.
had a chance
Okay.
yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought, you know what, maybe I should wait till we have our workflow interview.
Yeah. Well, maybe I
So
can
I'm going to give
explain
it to
a
you.
little
I'm going
bit.
to I'm
Yeah.
going to remove my spotlight and let you kind of take over for a bit here, and let you go ahead and kind of share your experience with mobile to desktop and whatever you do there on your end.
Okay, cool. So I started using Lightroom, the mobile version. So I'll just call it, because they're both called Lightroom. I was just saying to everyone else before, I'll call it Lightroom when we're talking about the cloud version, and then Classic when we're talking about the desktop version, because they do both have the same name. So I started using Lightroom, the cloud version, about 18 months ago, when my now 18-month-old baby was born. And I have always really liked Lightroom, and that was sort of how I transitioned to doing photography for clients. Was that I used to edit everything in Photoshop, and I was like, how do professional photographers do this? It just takes so long to edit everything in Photoshop and getting it consistent and everything. And then I realized that was like the point of Lightroom, was to apply edits across multiple photos and be able to synchronize your settings and all that kind of stuff. So when I realized that's what Lightroom was for, then I was like, oh, okay, maybe I could actually do this for clients and deliver it in a reasonable amount of time. So I've
I'm
been
just gonna
using
I'm gonna
Lightroom.
cut in on
Yeah,
you there
sure.
for a second. And you brought something up really interesting. I
Yeah,
belong to a very popular Photoshop and Lightroom group, and very often you'll see people post what's the best resource to learn Lightroom, and you'll get these comments like pros use Photoshop,
oh,
and
okay,
and
yeah.
it drives me around the bend, because I'm a pro and I've been using Lightroom since Lightroom 3.1, right, or whatever, or was that
Yeah,
Windows 3.1, but Lightroom 3. And I like what you said about working in bulk, being able to
yeah,
apply edits to multiple images. And Lightroom is a super fast workflow once you get accustomed to it and understand
yeah,
how to use its catalog features. I think
yeah,
a lot of times pros that started with Photoshop maybe don't quite get why Lightroom is so powerful. And maybe that's why I
yeah.
get some of those ideas. What's your experience with that?
I think that for Photoshop, it's probably depends on what kind of professional photography you do as well. Like if you are editing, if you are working on singular images, or composites and things like that, then definitely Photoshop. But I think particularly for, at least in my experience, for wedding photography and portrait photography and things like that, you just can't, I just wasn't able to consistently work in Photoshop, because you can't see everything all at once, and
Yeah.
getting, the white balance all the same, or the exposures all, or the edit actually looking all consistent across a set. I just found that so hard in Photoshop, that it was enough for me to not ever progress to the point where I developed a consistent style. Really, I was just sort of
Yeah.
playing around. And then, and then in Lightroom, I still use Photoshop, but I do the bulk of the editing in Lightroom, and then I use Photoshop for what it's designed to do, which is pixel-based editing, where you're
Yeah.
actually going in and change. Maybe you need to swap heads or something like that. So that tends to be how I use them. I definitely use Photoshop still, but it's individual images rather than bulk sets of images.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I did used to do weddings. I don't do them now, but I do portrait sessions where I'll take several hundred pictures, or I do wildlife
Yeah,
photography where I take several thousand pictures. And I
yeah,
need a way to very quickly go through and cull and mark or edit
yeah,
images. One of the things I do with wildlife is I do use a program called Photo Mechanic to cull images even before getting to Lightroom, because with
yeah,
Lightroom,
yeah,
or with wildlife, I'll take 1,000 images
yeah,
going for a specific image. So I may only end up with 5 images in the end of the thing I was trying to accomplish. And so
yeah, yeah,
I preface my editing with Photo Mechanic, which allows me it's a very rapid program
yeah.
for specifically for culling down.
Yeah, yeah. I used to use Photo Mechanic too, and then something happened to my computer that it stopped reading the raw files as quickly in Photo Mechanic, and I just could never get it
Oh,
fixed, and so it wasn't any
yeah,
faster than in Lightroom. That's always something that I've struggled with in Lightroom, is how slow it is to load previews. But
yeah.
yeah, I don't know what I did wrong in Photo Mechanic, and then I switched computers, and it was kind of an equivalent speed then. So I just sort of stuck with Lightroom.
I
But
stayed with Lightroom. Yeah.
yeah, when it was faster, it was amazing. It was so quick to color photos. which is always what takes me the longest.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way. I've found a way to make Lightroom behave really quite quickly. But the
Yeah,
trick is don't get out a library module until
yeah,
you really need to edit. Like
yeah,
if you
yeah,
don't need to be editing, if you're just culling, if you stay in library module and you have good size previews pre, if you edit or if you one-to-one previews, if you
yeah.
let it do its job and let it render one-to-one previews, it is
Mm.
really fast. But as soon as you go
Yeah,
into develop module and you load an image, it wants to load the raw file, and
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
when it slows down.
Yeah. I think that's when I haven't done weddings for a while now since having my second son, but yeah, that's what I was doing was letting it take all that time to build the previews, and I just go and do
Yes.
something else. But
Yeah.
it just saves you so much time when you actually go to look at the files then. Yeah. So
So
that's
help us out. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. I was going to say, help us out. I'm out, I'm taking pictures. I got a bunch of pictures on my phone.
yeah,
I don't really want to edit on my phone because I did have issues, that I didn't really install it properly. And so it ended up adding to my catalog images I didn't want or need. And so
yeah.
right now I'm, speak to me like I'm really brand new with this whole mobile kind of getting things from my phone, maybe seeing them on a desktop later. What do you do? How do you manage Lightroom
Well,
and
there's so many different ways to do it, and I think that when I first started using Lightroom because I'd always stuck with Lightroom Classic just because it was always my preferred thing, and then Adobe's been sort of pushing people to use Lightroom more over the
yeah,
last couple of years, and obviously like the rename to make it Lightroom, and now the other one is Classic was part of that. And I started using it because when my son was born, I was sitting on the couch breastfeeding him for hours and hours on end, and I just physically couldn't get to my computer. So
yeah,
then to entertain myself, I started using Lightroom to edit photos just for entertainment's sake. And I kind of got into the habit of using it and really liked some of the features. But as you say, like I was just thinking about that when you were saying you're culling and you like the desktop for culling and sorting. That has been the feature, probably the biggest feature that has kept me out of using Lightroom entirely and kept me in Classic.
yeah,
Because those features for labeling and just this, it's just not built for that. Lightroom, the cloud version, because it's more of a it's more of a like a personal consumer product rather than Classic. I feel is more built for professionals,
yeah,
or has more features that are useful for when you're doing big volume stuff. So
yeah,
yeah, when I use Lightroom, like using it as a tool to get your photos from your phone to your desktop is a good method. But as we were talking about just a little bit before you arrived, Ron, was that then your catalog takes up all the space in your cloud. And then you either have to pay an exorbitant amount of money, what I feel is exorbitant
yeah,
amount of money to buy more cloud storage, or you have to find some way of getting those photos out of the cloud while retaining
yeah,
your edits, and then, or you have to just abandon your Lightroom catalog. So presumably you don't want to just abandon those photos. You don't want to just
yeah.
delete those photos and lose all the edits anything that you've done with them, because it is useful that you can use Lightroom as a culling tool, or you can use it to do preliminary edits. So what I might do is just sort of walk through the process of how you can use Lightroom for the features that are beneficial, and then get those things into Lightroom Classic, and then get them out of Lightroom, the cloud version.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think that really took a fair bit of trial and error for me to work out. It's not I couldn't find anything that was clear online in terms of how to address that issue. Where
No, and I did some quick searches because I like the kind of fun, fast way that Lightroom mobile works.
yeah,
I liked it, but like you said, it's death by subscription. If you take a lot of pictures, that
yeah.
your 9.95 US a month is not going to be enough.
No, it goes up
Yeah.
really quickly. And So yeah, I mean, like I filled that, like in the year that I had off and maternity leave, I filled my quota and I wasn't shooting any client work at all. So I filled my quota at towards the end of the year, and I was like, okay, well now I need to work out how to clear this because I don't want to lose all the edits, but
Yeah.
I don't want to have this all full. Um, so I might share my screen if that's all
Yeah.
right, and
Yeah. Please
I
do.
shall
Please do.
walk through how that kind of works. There we go.
Oh, and as a side note, when I did add my catalog on my phone, I went
Yep.
from having almost all 20 gigabytes available that they give you with your cloud initial cloud subscription.
Yeah.
And the day that I did my catalog synchronization from my phone to my cloud, I ended up it used up almost 10 gigabytes just right there. It was like
Yeah.
from
Yep.
it's like I've used half my space in an afternoon. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. 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 So I mean,
wow.
if you're going to use Lightroom, you have to have a system in place in order to clear it so it remains usable. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I mean, there's the main features that I like is that I can cull photos on the go, and so usually I upload my new batch of photos into Lightroom into a new album. So some of the differences between classic and Lightroom become evident in a minute when we try to move into classic, but these are I think they're called folders, and then you've got albums in Lightroom, and then in classic you have collection sets and collections. So there are two different styles of how the photos are organized. They're just called a different thing. So what I do in Lightroom is I just use the Lightroom Add Photos menu to add the photos into Lightroom and let them upload to the cloud. So if that's on my phone, I would use the import button, like when you select some
Yeah.
photos and you import them into Lightroom, and allow them to upload. So what happens then is that they go from your device, wherever you've picked to upload them from. They get uploaded into the Creative Cloud, your cloud storage. Then in Lightroom Classic, if you have connected your Lightroom Classic catalog to your Lightroom catalog, they are then actually downloaded again to your computer, and then they are synchronized between the two devices. So that's a little bit tricky to follow all of the locations that they are, but if you're starting with your mobile phone, you're going to have a copy on your mobile phone. It's going to go up into Lightroom, then it's going to come down to your computer and synchronize to Lightroom Classic. So in that way, you're getting your photos from your phone onto your computer. But if you are like me and you start in Lightroom and you upload your full-sized raw photos from your computer, when it does this synchronization of coming into Classic, you're actually downloading a duplicate copy of your photos from the cloud. So you end up with two copies of your large raw files on your hard drive. And also, when you upload from your computer into Lightroom, Lightroom stores a cache of those images on your computer. So you actually end up with three copies between, you have one copy that's been on your computer to start with. It then goes up to the cloud, so you have a cloud copy, so that's two. It then downloads to your computer in order to synchronize with Lightroom Classic. And in order to be used in Lightroom, it has a cache version on your computer. So you end up with three copies of the same files on your computer and one copy in the cloud.
Wow,
So
that's a lot of space.
it is. So particularly these three, because these are all raw files so I sort of worked out a workflow of how to move that through. So when you're as you're using the cloud features of Lightroom, then getting rid of that a little bit so that you can clear out the 3 multiple copies that are on your computer, and to clear out the 1 copy of Lightroom that's in the cloud. So first of all, when you're using Lightroom on your computer, it stores this cache. When you're using it on your phone, it's not storing a cache, to the best of my knowledge. Like, maybe it is, but basically, this cache version is so that it can quickly access the raw files and quickly do edits while you're working on your computer. So maybe it's doing that on your phone as well, but it hasn't filled up my phone, whereas that's how I found out it existed, because it filled up my computer, and I was like, why does my computer never have any space left? And so that's how I discovered it on my desktop, because it was filling up my C drive. Whereas on my phone, I haven't noticed that to be an issue. So maybe it does, and I just haven't found it yet. So in terms of managing that, because that's the first step, that's a setting which is in, I'll share my screen again. So that's in Lightroom. That's a setting in Lightroom, where if you go into preferences, so you go edit and then preferences, and then when they load.
It would have been nice if they said Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Web, and Lightroom Mobile. Then I think people would get their heads around it.
That would be useful, because the desktop version of Lightroom, so the desktop version of Lightroom, which is the cloud one, is different to the mobile version as well. So there's sort of like 3 versions.
There are 3 unique versions that all kind of work together.
Yeah, they work together as long as you have them set up right, I suppose. So this setting here, local storage in the preferences, this photo cache here is what I found filled up my hard drive. I think probably because I hadn't set it up properly. So you can change it so that you've got control over how much of your disk space it's taking up. And then in this folder here is where it's actually storing those originals. So you can actually go into that folder, and it's in one of these weirdly stringed numbers here. It looks like it's not that one. It'll be this one here. So in that weirdly stringed, whatever it's called, you've got a folder called Originals, and that's where it's storing all of those cached files. So you can actually go into these. It does clear the cache periodically, like it'll go in and it'll clear out the cache if you haven't used the files for a while. So that's why my cache is currently cleared. I also set a reminder on my calendar to clear it, to go in and actually delete them periodically, because otherwise I have found that it does tend to fill up my hard drive. So that's one of the copies that it's surprising you with. So then you've now got your photos in the cloud, because you've imported them into Lightroom. They've uploaded into the cloud, into your cloud storage up here, and you've taken up however much of your cloud storage that you've got access to. In Lightroom Classic now, in order to have those photos come back into your Classic catalog, you have to synchronize your catalog with the cloud one. So that's in Edit and Cloud Settings, Catalog Settings, sorry. When you have a, let me find where it is. Oh no, sorry, it's not in there. It's in Preferences.
Yeah, in Preferences,
Yeah, so let me just find where it is. So if you click on your cloud and then go Settings, Sync Preferences. Mine's taking a long time to load. It's coming up on my other screen. There it is. So you've got to, then you would log into your Adobe account, and it tells you that you've got it all synchronized and so on.
Yeah.
So that's the first step to getting them from Lightroom into Classic, is doing this sync. If you have a lot of files in Lightroom, when you do this, it'll take a long time for the synchronization to happen, because they all have to get from Lightroom down into your onto your computer, and then they have to, and that takes a while, depending on how fast your internet is. So this is where the second copy of files comes to. It comes to a folder which you can select, but the synced images, as far as I can tell, there's no way to automatically force those to relate to the original images that you uploaded into Lightroom if you did it from your desktop. So this becomes the second copy in this folder where your files end up coming down to. So I'm just going to open this in Explorer. Rather than you can set it to come down in dated folders, which would be a good idea, but it just comes down in the dated folder and has no, no labeling as to what that folder is or anything like that.
It's not like when you import and you tell it, by location, by name, it just comes in with this by default.
Yeah, it just comes in by default. And now that in itself is probably fine. So later in my workflow, when we then try to get these files linked back to where I originally had them, it can become a bit of an issue if you have phone photos in a separate location to your digital SLR photos. So what happens then is that then this folder, this album comes down as a collection into Lightroom, and it shows this little symbol to say that it's synchronized. So any edits or any, if I've rated them or if I've flagged them, that all comes down. So that becomes an easy way to, if you're going to cull in Lightroom, or if you're going to do preliminary edits in Lightroom, all of that comes down with the photo so that you have those changes synchronized into your Lightroom Classic catalog. So what you then have to do is you have to then, once you have finished with those photos being in your Lightroom catalog, then you have to get them out of Lightroom and let them just live on your computer again. So that process is fairly straightforward, but it is not overly obvious how to do it. So the way that you do it is you first have to select a folder that you're finished with. If you go, okay, I don't want this folder in Lightroom anymore, I just want it to be living on my computer, you have to right click and tell it to stop syncing with Lightroom.
Yeah.
And then it turns off this little symbol. Because if you don't tell it to not sync with Lightroom, if you tell it to stop sync, if you don't tell it to stop syncing, when you delete it from one location, it will delete it from the other location. So you have to, in Classic, you have to tell it to stop syncing in order to then go into Lightroom and delete it from Lightroom. So I hope that kind of makes sense.
So, yeah, so I guess it works either way. Once it's no longer syncing, you could delete it from one location and it won't update the other location. But if that little symbol is on, deleting it from one deletes it from the other.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay,
so
that's very
now
important.
Yes. So now that I've turned the sync off, it's not syncing with Lightroom anymore. I personally just have a collection set that I've called Brought Out of Lightroom, as in I've brought it out of Lightroom. So I just drop it into my collection set of photos there that's brought out of Lightroom. So now that I've brought it out of Lightroom, I can go back into Lightroom and I can find it, which hopefully is in here somewhere. Oh, now I can't find it because I've sorted it. Let me try a different one. I'll try this one. I'm going to unsynchronize this one. And then I'm going to move it into my Brought Out of Lightroom section.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go here and I can now select all of these photos and I can right click and delete the photos. It's going to say, do you want to delete these from photos? Yes, I do. I'll delete them. And then I can delete the album.
And that's an important step. I guess Lightroom for web is very similar to Lightroom Classic, where you need to delete the photos before you can delete the album or folder.
It is, yeah. Because if you just go delete album, the photos are still there. They're just no longer sorted into that album. So they're still there, and then they're somewhere in your thousands of photos, and you have to go and try to find them. So
delete the photos
definitely,
and then the album.
yeah,
Okay.
definitely go the photos first, then the album. So now we've got these photos they're out of Lightroom. So they're now just referring to my local copy, but they're not referring to my original local copy. They're referring to the Lightroom downloaded copy. So what I have to then do is I go click on any of the photo, right click on any of the photos and go show in Explorer. Now this is the folder that Lightroom Classic downloaded from the cloud in order to synchronize the photos with my computer. And this is a duplicate copy to a set of photos that I already have on this drive elsewhere. So I don't need these photos because I have all these photos elsewhere. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to lose the edits on them. So what I have to do is go to the folder and just rename it to something else. Call it something like ready to delete. And then in the catalog, then in the catalog, you'll then get this. Yeah, you'll get this photo is missing warning, which will come up on all of them. So it will immediately realize you have changed the name of the folder. So you click on photo is missing. Would you like to locate it? Yes, please. And then you click on it. And then I go to where I originally stored it.
Yeah, where they were in the first place.
Yeah. So this is according to my own sorting system.
Here they are.
And then you just match up the number. So I'm looking for the one with 53 on the end, same as you would for anything. And because I had selected locate nearby, they're all back. So
we lost your voice for some reason there.
Oh, can you still hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Not sure why.
Let me have a look if I can come back. Can you hear me now?
Muted.
I'm not muted. How about now?
Something changed.
How about now?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Please, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Yep. This is what happens with technology.
So Ron, are you the only one who can't hear me?
You keep trying to get your voice back, and I'll talk. If that doesn't work, you can leave and come back to the link and it may reset.
Yeah, okay.
I just kind of want to go over that though. That was a very important step about how Lightroom on your desktop had the original files. And then when you synchronized it with the cloud, you can hear her. So maybe it's me.
Is it your Bluetooth? Maybe your Bluetooth has dropped out.
Let me check my Bluetooth.
Yeah, I can hear Jemma.
It says it's okay.
And Ron.
Let's just look here.
Yeah. So can I?
My listening device here to Realtek. Do I hear you now?
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
It's odd. I cannot hear anyone. So Karen, can you unmute and see, or Elizabeth, unmute and see if I can hear you?
Can you hear me, Ron?
No, so it is definitely me. I have lost you all. Let me keep working on this. I'm going to get it all back in a second. I'll just change my speakers. You should be back. Speakers. There, now I hear you. Okay.
All good?
I hear you now. Yeah, I just,
okay,
something's up with my earbuds. We're good. Thank you for helping us work that out. So I just wanted to go back because this is a very important step. You had the images, your original images on your hard drive.
Yeah.
And then you told Lightroom to synchronize it with Lightroom Web, which is the cloud.
Yep.
And in doing that, it created another copy on your hard drive in another location.
Yeah.
And that's where those synchronized photos are going to live while you're editing them.
Yeah.
That's when you said show in Finder, it showed them.
Yeah.
And then you repeat what you did, because this is a very important step I don't want people to miss. How you
Yeah.
got Lightroom to lose where they were so you could reconnect it to your original folder, and that
Yeah.
would bring all your edits, and then you could get rid of those old pictures. So let's do that one more
Yeah.
time, because
Yeah,
that's a
let's do that
very
again.
important step.
Cool. So I'll share my screen again. So so first of all, we unsync. So we turn off the sync,
Yeah.
and then I then show any of those folders. I go show in Explorer, and then so this was a bad example because they were in the same folder as the other one. So that's
okay.
why it's actually lost them. So I'll just do
It's
a
already
different.
lost
I'll just
them.
do a different example.
Okay.
So I'll go unsync first. So whenever you're trying to get them out of Lightroom, you always have to unsync it first, and
Yeah.
then you right click and show in Explorer. And then that's showing the copy that has downloaded from the cloud in order to synchronize with Lightroom Classic. So
Yeah.
this is a duplicate copy because I had this copy already on my computer.
Yeah.
So I just go up a level, like back to the previous file structure, and I just rename it.
Yeah.
To anything. And that breaks the connection in Lightroom. So immediately it says the photo is missing. So you click on that and it says, would you like to locate it? And then I browse through my own photo structure. So where my normal photos are kept.
Photos are where the originals were before you put it to the cloud.
Yep. So this is where the originals were. And I find the one with the same number.
Yeah.
And it says find nearby missing photos, which yes, I do want to do that.
Yeah.
And then it will immediately reconnect to all those photos.
And the catalog's back to normal with the
Back to
catalog
normal.
edits. And you can now go back and delete the folder you said you were going to later delete.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do this just on a periodic basis. So when I either if I have finished with a set and I've delivered it to clients, or if I at the end of each month, something like that. Last year, I was just doing it periodically whenever my Lightroom would tell me here that it was full. I would just go through this process. And depending on how people shoot, they could schedule it into their calendar to say, okay, well, I'm going to do it every month or something like that, just in order to keep it kind of ticking over. So once you've done that and your Lightroom catalog is back to normal, then you can delete these duplicate copies that are the Lightroom sync copies. And that will help your hard drive situation as well. You're not doubling up every copy of everything. So in terms of getting photos off your mobile phone and onto your computer, like I'm looking at this and I've worked out this process because I'm going computer, cloud, computer. And so I don't need two copies. But if you're going from mobile, cloud, computer, I mean, that's a legit way to get your photos onto your computer. Instead of having to plug your phone in and copy them all off and wait till they download and import them into Pollari. Like if you're using mobile on your Lightroom mobile, then you are doing this process if you have them connected. So if you've got your two things connected, you're doing this process. And when you're using your catalog, if you're sorting sorry, I've just flipped back to my screen, which I know you guys can't see, so I'm just going to go back to sharing. If you're sorting your catalog in Lightroom with albums, like I have one that's called phone photos, and that's just ones that I've happened to edit on my phone. So the same process would apply when you're done with those photos in Lightroom. Over here, you can remove them out of your Lightroom catalog in the same way. So I would recommend, if you are doing that process, maybe have an album in Lightroom that is by year or by month if you shoot a lot, so that then you have like a collection of things that you can periodically get rid of, instead of trying to go through every single phone photo that you've ever taken for all of eternity and deleting them periodically. So if you have some kind of organizational structure in your Lightroom on mobile, that will then translate into a collection in Lightroom Classic that you can then use to cull those photos out of Lightroom Mobile as you fill up your storage space.
Yeah, I can really see the value of having this connected workflow, but also having to manage the space requirements like you figured
Yeah.
out. I mean, the other option is we
Yeah.
could all have some babies and have to be home and work this out for ourselves.
Just take a year of maternity leave to work it
Yeah,
out.
just take a year off and work out how to make this workflow happen. I really appreciate that. And I really, it just, the light bulbs went off when you said to stop synchronizing so that you don't, you know, because that way if you delete from one, you don't delete from all. And
Yeah.
then by changing the name of the cloud folder that's sitting on your hard drive, sounds weird, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it loses its location. And all you got to do is point it back to the original folder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then things kind of line up automatically. It seems like a long way around something Lightroom could address in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it shouldn't be that complicated,
No.
but for some reason that's how they've done it. And I can understand, because you know, not everybody organizes their folders in a really logical fashion. And the whole point of Lightroom is to get it into the cloud, and they don't care where it is on your computer. Like, they're like, yeah, I've taken it, it's in the cloud. Like, what do you want me to do? Keep track of where you kept it? So in that way, I can kind of see their point, because they're taking it up into the cloud via Lightroom. All they care about is the files. And then when they come back down to Lightroom Classic, they're not tracking where it entered. They're just going, oh, well, here they are again.
Yeah,
So,
and of course Adobe would just say, well, all you need to do is buy more space and then everything is good. Like just buy space.
Yeah, which would be great in an ideal world.
Would be good if we could all do that. And it's not just space in the cloud. It's the 3 copies sitting on your hard drive, the cached copy and the 2 hard copies. Where literally every picture is the equivalent of 3.
Yeah. And the cached copy is a tricky one, because I found it by accident, because I just couldn't understand why my hard drive was constantly full. And then I found someone else who'd had the same problem, and they're like, oh my God, this copy is sitting there. And so I went into the settings in Lightroom, those preference settings, and I changed it so it was like 5% of my hard drive. But
that would change
changing it, no, it didn't get rid of everything. It just left everything that was there and just was like, oh, okay, in future I'll take 5%.
From then on.
Yeah, from now on, but I've already taken up like half of your hard drive. So I then experimented tentatively with deleting the cached copies. I was like, is this going to be fine, or is it going to ruin everything? And it seemed to be fine. So I then just went and deleted the entire cache. Yeah.
In Lightroom, you can delete everything except the LRCat file. You can delete your previews, your helper file. You can delete everything, and it will, as long as you got the LRCat file in Lightroom Classic, it will rebuild everything when it's needed. I would imagine you could delete your cached files and you would still be fine.
And it should, and it did seem to be fine when I experimented with it. So so I think it's just kind of getting your head around what is happening, and that helps you with Lightroom, because if you can think about how you're planning on shooting, and organization of your files is always going to be helpful. Like if you organize by month, hopefully you're organizing them by month and day and year, so that then when the same kind of thing, when it goes up into Lightroom, then it'll come back down with some kind of structure. The only other thing I haven't mentioned, which I'm just going to show you again in Lightroom here, is that, so these Lightroom albums here that come in, so I've got like the Kindy obstacle course, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
These albums, they come back down into Lightroom as collections, but you then have to sort them into collection sets. So this 2021 Pro Photos collection set, I had to create that
You
manually.
created that and then dragged them into it.
And I dragged it into there because every album, this higher level structure does not copy down into your
Good
catalog. It
point.
just,
yeah.
So it just brings, that's why I always date everything, reverse
Yeah.
date. And then I have a higher level structure as well. And then basically I just went into the catalog that's syncing, and I just recreated my structure so that they would all be in the same place when I was expecting to see them. So that's something that is just something to be aware of, that if you have got folders, you have to recreate them as collection sets, because the albums come down as collections. So there's,
And
that's
not
just that
within
little,
a folder, not within a compartment.
So that's
So-
just that little bit of extra structure that helps you to kind of track where things are. So
That's
so I
great
mean,
tip
it's
to live on.
a good system as long as you are aware of what it's doing. And I'd say, Ron, for your issue where your daughter's files have ended up in your catalog, perhaps she was logged into your Adobe account or something like that when she was using it.
I think she was
And,
using another device, and then it had been logged in when she was using it and didn't realize that and then they just appeared when I installed Lightroom Mobile. They just appeared. I'm going, well, they weren't in like when I go up on the cloud prior to that day, they weren't there. So I'll get to the root of it, but I'm pretty sure it's because she had been logged into another device, but on my account, not on her account.
Yeah. And I think it's if you can just identify where the original files have come from, and then try to switch off the syncing or disconnect that part of the syncing,
get it off
and
there.
then you should be right. Yeah.
Then I can put it back on my phone and they won't dump in like that.
Hopefully not. Or they may at first, but at least hopefully you can then work out how to get rid of them. I often find when I first set it up on a new computer, there's a bit of like just everything piling in to start with, and then you can kind of sort out what you actually need.
I'm sure if I deleted them and it deleted my daughter's original copies on whatever device she was on, she's not going to be too happy about it. So it's really good to know not to have them synchronizing when I make my off my device.
When you make the cut.
Well, Jemma, I'd like to thank you for sharing that information, because in a lot of you've probably seen it, a lot of the chat rooms, a lot of Adobe places, people say, well, they just don't play together, don't do it. Like classic and web and mobile, they're not playing well together, don't do it. And you've showed us a way to actually make it work if you spend a little time understanding how it goes up and then back down to your different places. So once you understand,
draw a diagram or something.
Do a little Venn diagram of where it all goes. But I'd like to thank you for sharing that, because you've really literally solved a problem of mine where I could see me now using it a lot more, still with a desktop centric workflow, but still take advantage of some of the mobile stuff.
And I think that's where it's really powerful, because if you're not, like, if you're hesitant to use it because you're just thinking, oh, I'm going to run out of space, so don't invest time in it, you don't really want to use it. And then if you know that you can kind of keep it flowing through and just use it for what's active, then it becomes quite a useful tool, because you can do stuff on the go. You can edit on the go, and you can get your presets from Lightroom Classic into Lightroom and do some basic edits on the go and all that kind of stuff. So it's powerful if you can trust that you can clear the cloud as you go.
Anyway, stay with us. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A, but thanks to those who have watched. Hopefully you got your head around that how it goes up and then comes back down to your desktop in another folder. If not, watch again. That's why I had Jemma go over it twice. But from what I've seen, it's actually going to create a solution for me, and it'll allow me to use Lightroom Classic along with my cloud applications, and just the way I want to use it, not to synchronize everything and have everything all full on and synchronizing. So thank you, Jemma, and hopefully you'll be able to come back and share some more with us in the future.
Cool, thank you.